Hey folks, I'm here to talk to you today about a shipping mindset using a presentation full of random pictures that I found off Google Images because that's how it's supposed to be done. So a little bit about me and why I have some expertise in this stuff. So I've been in the games industry for about 6 years if you count non-indie experience. If you count indie stuff, I've been making games for about 10. This includes everything from, digital games down to board games and card games, kind of all over the place. I've worked on everything from Pokemon to Lost Ark to DomiNations and a bunch more other titles that are all over the place. And I also have a bachelor's degree in game design and development, which was essentially a computer science degree with all of the electives cut for game design stuff. And if that's not enough for you, if those professional qualifications aren't enough for you, I am also platinum in Final Fantasy XIV's Crystal Conflict PvP. So professional credibility. So let's talk about what I'm actually talking about when I say that shipping mindset. Making games is really, really hard, as sure all of you know. Again, congratulations to all the folks who have successfully completed a game as a part of graduating and working on this. So hands off to you all again. And of course, I'm sure you discovered that this was a really hard thing. In the end, it's all really fun. You're talking about, grand visions, exciting plans. This is going to be great. Players are going to love this. And by the end, you're terrified because if somebody clicks on this button too fast, they lose all their premium currency and then they can come and sue you. And that's not a problem anybody wants to solve. But we also need to think about, now that you're outside of an academic setting, games now also need to be not only fun, but they also need to be realistic. Games, unfortunately, is a business. It'd be wonderful if we could just, get money from some magic hole and we could just make games and pay for our food that way. But that doesn't work this way. We're in a passion industry and we have to, unfortunately, afford rent and afford food doing what we love. And that means that games have to ship, games have to get out the door, and they have to do those things within a reasonable time frame. So let's talk about what a shipping mindset is. A shipping mindset is essentially how to get your game from A to B and as quickly as possible and keep focused upon your goals. It's focused around some big questions that are like, does this actually help me get this into my players' hands as fast as possible? Is this good enough in order to get to people? You hear the term minimum viable product or MVP thrown around a lot. It's kind of different from that, but it's very similar. We'll get to that a little bit. And like the actual title of this presentation, it's a shipping mindset, or how to finish your damn game already. So how you actually get the game or the portion of it that you're working on out the door. So why do we actually care about this? Again, with funny images, because games are meant to be played by people other than you. That sounds really silly when you put it that way, but there's actually a really fun study that I like to talk about with this. Everybody's kind of heard of old school games being Nintendo hard, incredibly difficult. One of the main reasons why that happened was because the only people playing their games was them. And they kept getting better and better and better. And then suddenly they were like, we have to make it more difficult. And they did that enough times that by the time a very first player got it, they're like, this is impossible. It's a lot harder to do that these days. The industry's grown a lot in that. But if you work on stuff only by yourself, you're going to get that way. And that kind of applies to your whole team and yourself. So both internally and externally, you want to get something that's playable, it's exciting, that gets your basic ideas across as soon as possible. So we want to ship games as fast as possible. And then there's getting to market first. There's a lot of things where it's like, oh, auto chess. People remember the big auto chess boom, right? Everybody came out with an auto chess clone. Does anybody actually care about like the Dota auto chess clone? Anybody care about that? No, because they didn't come to market first. They weren't the first auto chess game, and they came out after Teamfight Tactics. So therefore, nobody cares. So getting to your actual ship date first is very important. And also, we're in the golden age of games as a service. And I know it's a really scary term, particularly in academic settings, because we think about, microtransactions and paid content updates. What I'm talking more about that is that it has never, ever been more acceptable to ship something that's not entirely done and not entirely polished. Steam's greenlight stuff that has been kind of spun down now, but early access titles, people are a lot more comfortable with you putting something out in front of them that's buggy and saying, it's buggy, please don't be that mad. I just want to see if you like it or not. People are okay with that these days. So we're in this kind of golden age of that, and it's only going to get better. And then finally, as for kind of talking about how you get your first job in the industry, a final game, a finished product is always going to be better than 2 or 3 half-done things. If you have to make a caveat, like Here's my portfolio. By the way, this game, you have to hit this weird hotkey to make it start. If it freezes, please restart. Nobody wants to deal with that. You want an actually finished product. So when is your product actually ready to talk about shipping mindset? It can be applied at almost any time during your project. It just really is depending on your goals, and we'll talk again about that in a little bit. The big thing is you never want to apply it too early when you're in the finding the fun mode. Everybody knows that, like, we have a prototype, we're playing it, we're going to see if it works. We're not sure if it's fun yet. Don't immediately start thinking about how to get this in the hands of players. Just try and find the fun first. So once your path to success, once you've kind of defined, here's the feature set we want to go with, that's when you can start talking about shipping mindsets. So of course you got to set your goals. What is the milestone that you're working towards? And this is going to change a whole bunch of stuff. So is this your very first playable prototype? Is this literally just, there's a cube that was made by a programmer and it bounces with the physics that we think will work? Is this fun? That's your first playable prototype. Is this your very first time that it's going to touch an actual player's hands in terms of a beta or an alpha? Or are you looking at soft launch? Are you looking at worldwide things? Are you looking at this is the final product? You know, you'll start to ask yourself some of these questions. And like, I kind of geared this more towards my industry colleagues that are not already kind of there, but you know, in the industry, you'll talk a lot about what are your KPIs? How many people, how many customers we want in the game? What's our, you know, clicks per install on our ad revenue? All these crazy buzzwords that are gross to think about in this context. I'm talking more about big ideas. What players are going to be playing this? What phase are they playing it at? How many people are going to be in there? But the big question is, how do you get there? Like, how do you actually get from A to B? And I haven't addressed that. I've talked a lot about what it is, but I haven't actually told you how to do it. So I'm going to tell you how to do it by telling you what can go wrong with it. So what can actually sink your ship? The biggest ones that people talk about a lot, and I'm sure all of you have had experiences with at this point, is feature creep. Feature creep is the big one. But then when you get into the industry proper, you'll also notice tech debt and tools become a big issue. And then there's just the concept of perfection, which we'll go into. So let's talk about feature creep by talking about sharks, because they're my favorite animals, and I will not be taking questions at this time. Moving on. No. So there is a great adage that I got from an old coworker when talking about game design and games specifically. It's called building a better shark. Sharks are some of the oldest and most specifically evolved animals in the world. They're built to be apex predators of our oceans, and that why is because every single feature on them makes them a better shark. There's not a single part of them, no matter how weird they look, that is not meant to be specialized for their environment to make them good, what they're really, really good at. Your game should be like that. And one of the ways to talk about this is game pillars. If people have never heard of game pillars, they're a really fun exercise that basically distills down what is cool, good, exciting, and interesting about your game into no more than 5 easy phrases or words. So for instance, we think about something like Breath of the Wild. I'm not going to cover everyone, but we're going to cover like exploration and crafting. Cool. Those are 2 cornerstones of Breath of the Wild. We can all agree, right? I hope so, because that would be a weird conversation otherwise. But if I was thinking about, ooh, okay, I'm really trying to get this in the hands of my players and the battle system isn't working quite correctly, I can't really tune it. Does it help you craft or explore? Nope, we don't need it. Cut it. Make a better shark. Make something that only focuses on what it is good at. And if it can wait, make it wait. Of course, Breath of the Wild would not be the game that it was if it didn't have combat, but I'm kind of taking this as an example. So identify what makes your game amazing. What are the key ideas that you are trying to get across? And then ask yourself the question, how does this feature address those game pillars? If you have to make any explanations beyond obvious jumps of connecting it to those pillars, scrap it. Leave it for later, cut it to another point, kick it down the road. Of course, this does lead to some very difficult things, and that's, of course, don't have children, don't have babies in your features. Like, you got to be ready to cut their throats ruthlessly. Be a shark, eat them, because you can't afford to have features that are your friends. Like, you have fun features like, oh, but the romance is like the reason why I made this game. Well, then you should have made it a part of your game pillars before you committed to this 8 lines of dialogue here. I'm sorry, it just doesn't work. So now let's talk about tech debt. Tech debt is a big industry problem, particularly when you're working on giant games with a whole bunch of people. Typically, when you're in an academic setting, it's just, does it work and does it not break? But when you're in the actual industry, you'll notice there's a lot of there's this huge feature here that it takes devs 20 hours whenever they want to go in and touch this system, and we can do it but we've been lugging this 20-hour stone behind us for months and months and months. We really want to go fix it. Those things are great. But again, it depends on where your goals are actually setting. Is this your very first playable? How much of a manual touch do you want to give? Do you want to need to be sitting down beside somebody playing your first prototype and saying, okay, there's this bug here, but if you click at the upper right-hand corner on this pixel, it will fix it. Just do that. Is that okay? If that's okay, then great. If that's not, make sure you fix that piece of tech debt. And then for longer term releases, it's something that, again, is kind of a difference from an academic setting to a real professional world in that you need tools. If somebody says, I can't get into the game, you can just say, tough luck. You have to be able to look up what they're having, look up if they paid you anything, look up how you can restore them, look up the issues that they're having. Do you have that stuff there? So make sure that you're asking the right question for the right time. Then sort of ask yourself the larger questions of how much time will this realistically save me? Let's take the 20-pound dev ball and chain example. So let's say that we had to touch that system once from now until the time that we're going to ship our, MVP out the door, right? So that's 20 dev hours of somebody going in and touching it. If the rework for it takes 30 hours, it's probably not worth it because you're wasting 10 hours of time. If you can kick that to later down the road, till after your MVP, don't touch it. And ultimately, if it changes nothing from the end user perspective, if you sit down and you're looking at something in the feature and it's like, how does it work before? Well, the player is able to claim something from their inventory. How does it look after? They still claim the thing from their inventory. It just works better on the back end. Probably not worth it for earlier phases. Probably worth it for later phases, especially if you're looking at a massive game, like a mobile game that's going to have millions of users touching it, hopefully. And again, always be asking yourself, is this actually building a better shark? And then, of course, we're talking about don't let perfect be the enemy of good enough. The one that I actually like a lot better comes from Montesquieu in 1726 of the better is the mortal enemy of the good. In this case, I'm adding big, heavy asterisks of good enough, because a lot of times in games, you can't get everything that you want. We all kind of come into this room. We all came into our very first games classes and like, I want to make World of Warcraft, but I really hate this part of it, so I'm going to fix it. And then you sit down to make your first game and it's like, it took me 30 hours to get a fireplace that you couldn't walk into and animated correctly. I can't do this. We've all had that experience. If you put all of your features for a game on a whiteboard, you end up erasing 80% of that whiteboard by the time that your game is finally done. In the 6 months you thought you had to do it. That's just kind of the nature of our industry. And you kind of have to take that exact same approach with how you're implementing your things. If you're an engineer and you're like, this system is terrible and the garbage collector is awful, and if you play the game for 3 hours, it will crash. If your average play session is more like an hour, you kind of can't really afford to care. There's this great story from Monsters, Inc. and Pixar. The guy was talking about how he had an existential crisis at 3 a.m. because he couldn't figure out what was the next album to put on Mike Sullivan's album cover in his apartment. And he's like, wait, nobody's ever going to see this but me. Nobody is going to care about this. If I just copy and pasted, nobody would know it was there but me. I should probably not do this. So you want to be constantly asking those questions. And if you're having a hard time asking those questions of yourself, seek outside perspectives. Go and talk to somebody else. Go to somebody who knows nobody about your game design. Speak about every feature that you're going to include except for the one you're dubious about. And if they don't be like, something feels missing, or they're, what about this? If they don't mention it, you probably don't need it. And that's really hard. But again, it doesn't have to be a fire and forget. We don't live in a fire and forget. The CD's out the door. We can't afford to change anything games world anymore. There are live patches. There are iterations. People will like to see these improvements anyway. So these are times that you can push things out. You can always touch it up later. And of course, shipping mindset's a team effort. You want to make these compromises and sacrifices together. Once you're in a real world setting, if you cut something, if you kick it down the road, make sure you tell your producer. They're not going to say, no, we can't ever do this again. It's going to be like, okay, noted. It's going to be the first thing on the list after we get through this first iteration or after we get this first milestone out the door. You can ask each other to gut check. I have artists who will ask people in other departments all the time, is this strictly necessary? I have people on my engineering team who will ask my artists, do we really need to redo this giant monster asset? We've redone it like 4 times already. We should really do it again. So make sure that's a team effort. And then, of course, just make sure that everybody knows your deadlines. Sometimes you get so in the weeds that you're like, wait, it's tomorrow? excuse me? The test is tomorrow. It's basically exactly like that. Yeah, there's not a ton difference in the actual industry. You need to make sure that people are aware of these things. And then making ship day fun. That's a picture of me on one of my ship days. We did this exercise called Mastering Hats, where we were trying to get the build out the door. Everybody picked a funny and silly hat and wore it to work, and you were not allowed to take it off until we were shipped. And it was always wonderful because the hats were always sweaty and gross, and you were really excited to take them off at the end of the day. So you can do fun things like that to make it really exciting. And of course, for my industry colleagues, no one likes to work on weekends or after hours, because once you have a job and you spend 40 hours working and you can't pick your own schedules, you don't want to work outside of that schedule as much as possible. So you never ship on a Monday, and never ship on a Friday, and never ship after 3 p.m. Those are your key rules for pushing anything live, because the moment you're like, what could possibly go wrong? I'll push it live at 3:01 p.m. It's 6 o'clock, you're sitting down to dinner, and it's like, people are broken, come fix it. And then your food gets cold. You don't want that. And then, of course, a party afterwards will never go amiss, just like pubs are very social atmospheres. Game mixers and one of their like pure palpable relief you can feel in the room after getting something out the door, and the accomplishment that you feel with sharing drinks with colleagues and friends. You just can't get over it. So kind of bringing it all together, it's an incredibly hard thing to do. It's really difficult, but it's one of the most important things in our entire industry is you actually have to finish the damn game. You got to implement a shipping mindset as soon as you can, once you know the path forward is there. But as soon as you know that's there and you know the path, you can start talking about it. Make a better shark. Just please, if you can remember anything else, remember the wheel drill. Kept talking about sharks the whole presentation. Like, that's all that I care about. Ask questions of your friends, your fellows, your colleagues. Just if there's even an inkling in the back of your brain saying, is this strictly necessary? Ask that question. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good enough. Just get it out the door. The only person who's going to know is you. And then work as a team and make it fun. And then one day you too will be able to post the ship it squirrel from GitHub in your Slack channels.